All right. Hello and welcome to another Down Fracture podcast, a podcast for talking jaws. Our basic housekeeping, as always, downfracturepodcast@gmail.com. Feel free to email us critiques, criticism, compliments, topics, your input to the topic that we presented. Keep it coming. We appreciate the feedback and the info and your insight into the topics as well. Per usual, Dr. Michael Wasson from Arizona Jaw Surgery here with Dr. Sam Bobek of Seattle Jaw Surgery. And then, Sam, we have a guest that we both know a little bit, but you know much better. Do you want to introduce him for us today?
Yeah, sure. We were catching up a little bit before this, but we brought on Mark Engelstad. So I met Mark probably 15 years
I
ago.
think
I think that's
2012. No, 2011.
something like that.
I
Yeah,
came on in 2011. You were a senior.
got
Um,
it. And Mark's quite a leader in the field. He has he's his current charge. I think you're a program director at Oregon Health Science University, the oral surgery program down there. And he was
that's
at
right.
University of Washington prior to that, and then I believe training prior to that, right? You've been an oral surgeon for about 30 years now. You finished up
I
at
finished in
Louisville.
2000. Yeah. So
Okay,
I
so
guess I have
25.
25 years, quite a long
Yeah.
time.
And
And
so
I've
he's
been,
got an interest in jaw surgery, but also in health informatics. And I just generally find Mark to be kind of a forward thinker in a lot of different topics. So I like catching up with him. So I appreciate Mark. You finished up a case and then joined us today. So thanks a lot.
yeah, it's fun to talk with you guys. I enjoy chatting about whatever's on the menu.
You rode your bike. It's a beautiful day in Portland today, I assume.
It is. It's
That
perfect today. Absolutely perfect.
that sounds great.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we were hoping to talk about resident education. I think in
Yeah.
terms of education, as you've been out for a little bit, you kind of can lose touch with the trends of what's going on these days with resident education. I know,
And it's funny, isn't it? When
y-
you graduate, you think, well, I'll always have a finger on, the pulse of this.
yeah,
And
totally. And
but it's easy to lose.
yeah, because I mean, I went down a training path, a 6-year program, and I did a year fellowship. Wasson did a year internship and then a 4-year program. Um, and your experience is 6-year, and then you did a master's of health informatics, I think.
I
Is that
did some stuff. I spent a year abroad when I finished, and it was much more of a Wild West back then. I remember I finished residency in 2000, and in 1999 I started calling around people I knew, and somebody hooked me up with somebody who hooked me up with a 9 months in Melbourne, Australia.
got it?
And so I spent, it wasn't a formal fellowship, but in Australia, they really have a much easier glide slope into jaw surgery than we did in the United States. And I remember showing up there as a newly minted OMS just out of residency, and I'd been taught by my surgical ancestors that I knew everything there was to know. And I got to Melbourne and I realized that there were people who did jaw surgery much better than me. And I learned so much down there just because they do so much of it. And the health system is different. It was much easier to access ambulatory surgery centers down there, and they had an ease and a facility that just kind of blew me away. And so that was super valuable for me. I mean, I don't know if I would do as much jaw surgery as I do if I didn't have that opportunity to kind of harden my training, like you did that your fellowship, Sam, and it really gives you uh, to sit at the foot of a master for a year, whoever they are, and do case after case after case is pretty irreplaceable.
Yeah, definitely. I think the international pathway, because I mean, a few of your residents have done that, right? I know
Yeah,
two at least.
yeah. I've had probably three residents, I think, who have gone to Australia and done something similar, and four, I guess, and each of them comes back with their minds suitably blown. Um, the Australian system is similar enough to ours to have a lot of the advantages, but different enough that it really gets your mind running about how things could be different,
Yeah,
than
I
they are
mean,
here.
I think historically in Seattle, there's a little cross-pollination with
Yeah.
like Netherlands or something. Where did
Yeah, I think Dale Bloomquist had a good relationship with some folks in the Netherlands.
yeah, so like the international connection.
Mhm.
Because I mean, My general impression is residency education was the same as what it was, but I now understand that isn't the case. So like there's more interest in 4-year programs now than 6, and kind of resident pools mixing up. So
It
what
kind
kind
of
of
looks that
changes
way.
have you seen?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question right now, and that's kind of the it does look like 4-year programs are having a renaissance. And if we look at the 6-year, the whole idea of a 6-year program is kind of an experiment, right? It's kind of a mutation. And it was, I think our surgical forefathers and foremothers thought, gosh, it's really hard to work in the hospital without a medical degree, and we probably are going to have to get one in order to ease our access to some of these things. And we did that, and the idea spread to about half the training programs, but then it stopped. And I think that was one of the kind of the overall problems in our field, is that this experiment only went halfway, and we decided that half of the programs would have one kind of curriculum and half would have another. And I think that has really hurt our specialty in the United States. It's hard to know because we can't split the universe and see what it would have been like if we had been all 4 or all 6. Who knows? Maybe it would have been stronger, maybe not. But generally speaking, when we have 2 halves of our field, each with their own separate concerns, each with their own different curriculum, we don't work together to solve educational problems. And so I feel like it divides the field, which makes it harder to solve problems and work together. And ultimately it weakens us because, other surgical fields don't have this issue. They just have one way of being.
Yeah,
They're all trained in generally the same way. They innovate, they share, and they don't have this kind of difference between them. They just are all the same, and they work forward to solve other problems. And I feel like we really didn't go all the way. We sort of have a generation of people get medical degrees, but we haven't really gone much further than that. We haven't become part of medicine. So licensure is a bit tricky for the folks that have the degree. I read a study that said of all the people who have double degrees, 1 out of every 4 doesn't have a medical license and doesn't practice, or doesn't have a medical license.
1
So
of 4.
1 out of 4 does not have a
Wow.
medical license.
That's
Yeah.
bigger than I would have thought. Because I mean, you run into trouble with like general surgery 2-year requirements versus 1 year. And
Yeah.
I mean, you get a bunch of resident letters about that to process that kind of paperwork. But do you think it's something more than that? Like why they aren't using their medical degree? Like just,
Well, part of it can just sometimes you can look around and say to yourself, well, my practice doesn't depend on this thing and it costs $500 and has these extra requirements, and I'm just kind of tired of it. There are a few folks like that, but
yeah,
I think for most folks, they might have moved to a state or just no longer qualify for licensure, and they look around and they say, well, this is not essential, and so they just let it go,
yeah. I mean,
which is an expensive thing to let go after you spent 2 years of your life and
because med school is
untold
expensive as
amount of
shit
money.
nowadays. I mean, it was a
It
lot when I
is.
was going, but
It's expensive.
it's a lot.
It's expensive, and then there's an enormous opportunity cost, and that opportunity cost now with such a hot job market, delaying your entry into it by 2 years is, even more expensive. And of course,
Yeah,
the money you make when you're younger has much more power than the money you make when you're older because of the, magical powers of interest
sure.
of
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Interest. So yeah, it looks like, to answer to wind back to your original question, I think for applicants, the brass ring continues to be and has always been the OMS certificate. That's what people want. That's what allows them to have a living, to get respect in their community, to do the things they want to do. It's that OMS certificate. That's the magical thing. And it used to be that people thought, well, it's a rough and tumble road, and I'm going to arm myself with a second degree just in case I have to. And I want the extra armor that the MD provides me, but it might start to be looking like the MD is now just a longer and more expensive path to the thing people really want, which is the OMS certificate. And there are certainly still aspects of our field where having a medical degree is helpful, but they're generally not the remunerative parts. And and people, I don't know, I can't say because who knows what's in the minds of folks, but um, this year there were 22 unmatched OMS training spots, and 21 of the 22 were in double degree programs, even though only, half of the programs are double degree, about half.
And
So
that was the
pretty
same as last
lopsided.
year? Was that the pretty similar?
Yeah, it was kind of similar to the year before. There was also approximately 20 unmatched spots, and the vast majority of them were double degree.
Yeah, because I mean, I don't know. I haven't interviewed anyone for residency spots since I was down at Oregon more than 10 years ago. So I mean, there wasn't typically many spots that went unmatched, right? Like
I
six,
think it
eight.
was less in the past. Yeah. And I remember I had a couple unmatched spots a few years ago, and I thought, oh my gosh, what a stain. How can this be? I felt terrible. And it's really not the program's fault. I mean, there are no programs that can't find somebody to take a spot. People will walk on
Yeah,
glass, across the Mojave Desert for a spot. It's never a sign that there's, something stinky about the program. It's just the math of the match can
yeah,
be
yeah,
unforgiving. And the irony is that double degree programs have to satisfy a usually much more particular master, and that's the medical school. And so the double degree program is often required to hold their candidates and applicants to a higher academic standard. So that even further dilutes the applicant pool. And those who can meet the academic standards that their medical schools demand, there are fewer of those, and each medical school is kind of competing for a smaller and smaller pool of people who, one, want the medical degree, and two, can satisfy sometimes the higher demands of the medical school itself. So then that creates just a market where there's more demand for these residents than there is supply. And there are even programs this year, double degree programs that didn't match, that couldn't find anybody on the open market that would satisfy their medical school. So they just sort of had to
that's really different.
let their position go. And that's kind of a tragedy because, we're supposed to be educating folks to take care of the problems of the people in their region and community.
Yeah,
And that's that's one of the problems I have. I'm a double degree, and so are you, Sam. And it is what it is. And I run a double degree training program, but I'm a deep skeptic of it. Mostly, from the standpoint of a program director, just because it really eviscerates my autonomy. I don't control the curriculum. I really have to build the curriculum around what the medical edifice demands and desires, both
sure.
during, and the problem is never medical school. Okay, it's 2 extra years, you go to medical school, that's your choice, and no problem, right? 2 years, if you want to spend the money, that's not the issue, the extra 2 years. It's that in order to, 2 years gets you a medical degree, which is great. You have a medical degree, but you don't, what you need is a medical license, not a
Yeah,
otherwise the medical degree doesn't get activated. You can't turn it on. It's the medical license is the electricity that allows you to flip the switch on the medical degree. And you can't get the license without an extraordinary amount of general surgery and other kind of gymnastics where we have to send our residents off for these rotations that arguably are of arguable value. They have to do them for sometimes over, a year. And other surgical specialties don't have to do that. Oto, neuro, urology, and orthopedics, they do about 2 months, maybe 3 months of general surgery these days because they have so much training in their own field. And, residents allow your department to be productive, and they allow you to bring in revenue, and they allow you to have a footprint in the hospital. And when you're sending your labor, your student labor force off to other departments to work, it also hollows out your own department.
sure.
And so it saps the control of the department when we have to sort of satisfy the needs of another profession, medicine, because we're not in medicine. So we have to send them off to general surgery so they can be physicians, but they really need to be in oral and maxillofacial surgery.
Yeah, I mean, I found my year in general surgery to be great. I'm interested to hear like the controls, and it makes a ton of sense that it would be more difficult on the regulatory side of just training residents. So
Yeah,
kind of
the
interesting.
experience is
Part of
always
it.
nice. I mean, who can argue with more experience and hanging out and doing things?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying that, rotating on these things isn't of value to the learner, but like you probably left some rotations thinking, wow, I can really run a ventilator now. And, these
You
days, I
don't
mean,
need that.
unless there was a natural disaster, I mean, you're not going to find yourself making any decisions about a ventilator or anybody in a situation like that. So,
Yeah. So
um,
on that whole topic, do you, because there's educators that meet and go over that sort of thing, like is there any changes afoot, or are they just kind of going to let it ride for a while and see what happens?
yeah, there's no central control of our educational system in OMS. I mean, we do it's it's uh it's pretty much each program unto themselves. There is of course a CODA, Commission on Dental Accreditation document
Yeah.
that spells out the minimum standards that each program has to meet. But I don't know if this issue is kind of so thorny and so difficult to grasp that, and there's no higher place or executive function that is steering us, so to speak. We're just sort of, I think each program is on its own to decide what it wants to do.
Yeah.
It crafts its own agreement with its own medical school. It carves out its own curriculum, the double degree programs, and if they can carve one out and it's good for them, they keep it. But I think, yeah, I don't think there's anybody in control, so to speak.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, the other change on the resident education part these days, at least what I hear about, is unions. University of
That's right.
Washington, they had that. I feel like that was within the last few years. Is that just a Northwest thing, or is that a
I think it's a coastal
national
thing for
thing?
sure. It's pretty common in New York and Massachusetts, and I think the upper Eastern Seaboard, and for sure up and down the West Coast. I think every major academic health center has unionized now.
And that's all residents, or is that the 6 years,
Yeah, it's
four
usually all the
years,
house
everybody?
officers, and the OMS residents can fall between the cracks because we have this
Yeah, yeah.
identity where we're not really one thing or another. And so, like at OHSU, for instance, the OMS residents are in the union, but the general practice dental residents are not, even though they're both federally funded house officers, residents from, CODA accredited. So where we fall, sometimes we fall in or out of the union. In New York, definitely in the union, OMS and all of dentistry. Anybody who works in the hospital is in it.
Because
But
I worked at Swedish here as a hospital, and I was part of a medical group that was not union based, but the hospital was union based. And so it was very much like the union rules applied to clinics if there were union employees there. But if you know what I mean, is
yeah,
that also
were the
true with like
was the
GPR?
physician workforce unionized or the
Physician workforce was not unionized.
right, yeah,
So
yeah,
you had like these, because I assume on the faculty, this could be wrong, the faculty isn't unionized at Oregon or at UW or any of these
that's
places,
correct.
but
That's
the
right.
residents are, and then the staff are. And so
Yeah,
is that
that's
like
right.
another complicating factor to all of this that maybe people don't realize is it's more complicated, like hiring and just kind of like the whole
Oh
changing of
yeah,
policy and all that sort of thing. I can only imagine
for
adding
sure.
another union to resident education just makes
Yeah,
it
for
more
me,
complicated.
as a program director, I was talking to somebody else who was a program director. I can't remember who recently, but they were they had felt like some of the learners were kind of playing the union card a little bit during
Sure.
education. I have not had even a whiff of that, and we've been unionized now for about 5 years, 4 or 5 years. I've never had a resident even mention their membership in the union or call towards it in any way.
But they can still get to
Um,
the dental school without too much trouble, and it's not like they can't work in different clinics than the GPR guys or anything, right?
Nothing like that. Yeah, it
Okay.
hasn't. I haven't had a single thing affect me or my decisions as
Okay,
to
that's good.
where they go or anything. Um, yeah, I think I'm not sure. Generally, if folks are happy and they're getting the experiences they want, because residents are still, although we have a lot of concern about the next generation, et cetera, but um, I mean, they tend to be the same, cut from the same cloth they have been cut from back to my generation, when I was a resident, and that is that they really just want to work.
Yeah,
You know,
sure.
they just want to operate, and they work an extraordinary amount. Um,
Yeah,
I'm always shocked, like, and I'm a little surprised. Like, I always expect one day to walk in and just three of them to be standing there and tell me, Dr. Engelstad, we're done. This is crazy. And it never happens. They
yeah,
just, so they're still cut from the same cloth. They love to work, they love to operate. At least
yeah.
that's been my experience.
That's cool. Watson, you got anything here? I feel like I'm peppering
Yeah, I
Mark
haven't
with
said
questions.
anything in a while, which is probably going to be very disappointing, definitely disappointing to our listeners. Um,
Definitely.
I mean, I do want to just first say it's refreshing to hear your perspective because we've said on this show, and Sam and I talk about it all the time amongst ourselves, is there is this tendency to justify our own path and our own program. We have a tendency to say, hey, I'm dual degreed and I work in a dual degree program, and that's the right way,
Yeah.
and I'm sticking to that. So I do have to say it's a little bit refreshing to hear your perspective and saying, maybe that's not the right thing in the current climate. And I even want to
Yeah.
take the climate and the trajectory back a little bit more. And I noticed it during my training. It was something that was kind of transitioning in my training is we've all become so much more, as you were kind of hinting at, subspecialized, and everyone has a
Yeah.
specific role. So one of the things I noticed during my training is the ICU became closed. Like it was all managed by critical care. Whereas if you had a patient in the ICU before, you were still managing that patient. And like it kind of seemingly simultaneously, we were saying, hey, we need to be getting this medical degree and getting this different training. But at the same time, healthcare in general has become so much more subspecialized, and you're not even
Hmm.
allowed to do some of the things that the training would indicate you're more able to do. So those things always seem to run opposed in my head of like, okay, we're saying and advocating for more training, but we're not allowed to do some of the things that that training would give us the opportunity to do. And I tend to agree with your perspective and Sam's of I would never fault anyone for more education, for more training, for more experience, for more knowledge. But you start talking about cost, opportunity cost, the
Yeah.
barriers that you're in, you're saying kind of the subspecialization of medicine, like everyone's kind of reeled in a little bit more. To me, all of those factors scream and point to maybe a 4-year track being more practical. Now, I'm not saying it's better, I'm not saying it's worse. I'm just coming at it from maybe a practicality standpoint, but what's your take on that? If we gave you all-encompassing power, like Sam and I
Yeah.
would, if it was up to us,
I would
you
vote for that. I'm
yeah,
in.
I'm all for it. You got 2 votes.
Take over.
What do you see as the solution? And we'll give you the grace knowing that the situation could all change tomorrow. But with current factors at play, what do you feel is the right way to go with resident training pathways?
I think trying to be part of two professions is not going to work long term. They're
So
like,
so pick one
they're
and be
islands
all
that are
in.
drifting. Yeah. And I think what we should do is pick one, unite, commit, and build a great training regimen that nobody can argue with. It used to be years ago, hospitals were run by doctors, the ambitious plastic surgeon would sit on the credentials committee and squash the dirty dentist who wanted to make, incisions on the skin. And that doesn't happen anymore. I mean, I'm not saying we don't face headwinds or we couldn't, but generally hospitals are run by people in suits and they're happy to take whoever will agree to do the work that they have and take the call that they need. And they're looking at your logbook and what you're able to do, and they're not so much interested in our interdisciplinary squabbles. I mean, and so I think we thought we would find cover if we just sort of adopted this name, right? If we called ourselves physicians and met the minimum criteria for being one, then our competitors would be diffused. And I always joke it's that even though we have double degrees, it's like nobody really thinks we're, anybody in medicine still thinks we're a dentist, and we're a lot like dad's, fourth wife. She might have the same last name as us, but nobody thinks she's part of the family. You know,
Is that an old man
And
thing? Does that
that's
qualify?
an
Would you
old
say?
man thing. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think it's solid.
I do. I
And,
like
no
it.
matter how many degrees you have, I mean, we are part of a certain profession, and I think we should embrace that. And there would be disadvantages, of course. You're always better off with more degrees, through a PhD in there, and anything else you can have. I mean, but I would rather that we unified and created a great training pathway that and if you look at other professions like osteopathic medicine, they modified their training so that they could be part of hospitals and training programs. And so I don't know if dentistry could do that. Maybe our forefathers tried that, and dentistry just said, "Nah, we're just going to stick with the educational pathway we have." And you're the ambitious surgeons, and you know we have a bit of the tall poppy syndrome, like, who do you think you are, going off to do these things? And these are your problems to solve, not ours. So we would need we would
Your
need dentistry
solution
to
is
come along
more,
and help us.
you don't feel strongly with one pathway versus the other. It's more so unification is what
Well,
you.
I think if I was the czar, and I had to make a decision, we're dentists first. It's most important that we're dentists. I would contract to dentistry, and then craft a surgical regimen that gave us the experiences that we need to do the kinds of work that we want. If we had to do all one or all the other, because I think trying to straddle both professions and be part of both professions is too costly, and it dilutes the thing that makes us the most valuable, which is our surgical experience. Because if you're off in vascular or transplant, then you are not doing maxillofacial.
So
Um,
do you feel
yeah,
like something, I mean, because that would throw a wrench in several aspects of our profession if it contracted down to 4 year only. Like, where do you, if you're going to be a cancer microvascular surgeon, run a cancer fellowship, other things as Sam and I've discussed, you
yeah,
probably need that. So what do you do? Do you create an optional 2 year pathway at the end, like some programs have done?
yeah. That's probably the best way. The most elegant way, rather than is to say, okay, we recognize that there are a subset of people who um, really do need to be part of this other profession, and let's launch them. It's a little bit more awkward to be launched into medical school after you finish a residency. I think a lot of people, that's a lot harder to stomach than it is to launch into medical school when you finish dental school.
And
Um, yeah,
don't take this as the truth, but I have heard grumblings of this that I think it's maybe one training program does offer that. You have a 4 year program, and then you have basically guaranteed admission into the medical school at the end of your 4 years if you should choose it.
yeah,
But no
yeah.
one ever does it.
Yeah,
Uh,
right. Yeah, yeah,
like like
yeah,
without that being a joke, like they get there and they're like, why would I do that? But maybe, I mean, there's so many factors that come into that. Maybe the type of person who would want to do 6 years knows it, and they know they want to be 4 year. But I
yeah,
think if that pathway were offered elsewhere, others would take it.
yeah.
But yeah, I think
You
that's
might
an
see it.
interesting way to do it.
Yeah, yeah. It's a bitter pill to swallow after you're a chief resident to go and be a
I
medical
think that would be
student
You
again.
could
impossible.
you could also
It's
moonlight and other things at that point, but I mean,
Yeah. And
Yeah,
then the
it's not
salaries
worth it.
that folks are getting now when they graduate just makes these decisions a little, that really changes the landscape quite a bit. And I'm not saying I want to nuke double degree programs, but if the question was if it had to be all one or the other, I would rather be in control of our own destiny rather than trying to do the hopscotch and the headstands that we need to do in order to belong to medicine, that really dilute our surgical training in maxillofacial and prevent us from moving forward. We're just so busy satisfying the demands of medical licensure that we're not innovating, you know?
I think the other thing you mentioned there that I heard that I understand is also a trouble in resident education is people are getting good salaries coming out of residency. Um, there used to be a pathway of just running into being junior faculty and getting on at
Yeah.
academic centers. And at least my understanding is that's not as common of a pathway as it used to be because of the financial part of things.
Yeah, it's a lot harder. I don't, there are certainly, every time I bring up this point, people always say, "Oh, but I know X or I know Y, and
Sure.
he makes a great salary, and she's paid this." And I say, "Well, that's true, but you know of them not because they're not because they're the rule, but because they're the exception to the rule."
Yeah.
And there isn't, there is, I think it's totally fair to say that there's. I remember when I was a resident and I was considering academics, and I thought, "Oh no, it's not for me." And I ended up being a lifetime academician. But I remember this guy saying, "Mark, you don't have to take a vow of poverty to be in academics." But to me, it kind of felt like I have had to take a vow of poverty. And there are a few people who sit atop a kingdom, and they've been the leader of this department forever, and they're totally wired in, and they're in a certain state with the right conditions, and they do okay, they do great financially, and they sit atop a pretty um, productive edifice that they've built. But generally speaking, people enter it, they get frustrated. um, there's not the advancement that they need. They're not getting paid, it's not enough, and they peace out. And it's getting, I don't know if we've entered this phase, but it's getting to the point where it's like people aren't even answering ads, sometimes for academic jobs, because they're not even in the right zip code for compensation compared to what, very, if you apply to a university, they'll get back to you in 3 weeks, and meanwhile there's a DSO or a group who's like whining and dining and answering your every email within 30 seconds, and they want to get you working, and because they need your knowledge, they need your expertise. It's only the doctor who can make the office productive, and
Yeah.
universities are just slow, so slow and ponderous. We just can't compete.
I,
And
because I don't think that's just universities. I mean, I feel like big medical groups are the same. I mean, that drove me
mm,
crazy when I was trying to bring somebody on. Like they had just outsourced the hiring to a different country actually. And so the people who recruited the surgeons, you had to go through that screening that was just so frustrating to even get to the people to talk to them to tell them it's going to be a bad salary, It was
yeah.
like anyway, the administrative logistics or component I hadn't really considered, but seems true. Um, is there
Yeah, it's a challenging,
is it getting better?
challenging time.
It's the same.
No, no,
No,
it's
it's
getting worse.
oh, that's not good.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. I mean, sometimes you just put together a part-time faculty, and you let them.
Do
They have,
you
yeah. So.
do you have anything positive to say? I feel
Yeah,
like
I feel
everything
like
you're saying
some
is like
positive things.
getting worse. This is
It
getting
does seem
worse.
that
This
way,
is
doesn't
getting
it?
worse.
Well, I
I
did say,
mean,
I thought that our future colleagues were set up well, and I really liked their attitudes and how hard they work and how much
you
they
did
love
say that.
surgery, and I think that's the biggest reason to be in the position I'm in is if you love being an educator. I just like it. I like doing it, and there's lots of advantages in education. I mean, the residents are a force that can give you a lot of freedoms, and they teach me a lot, and I have a lot more flexibility, certainly, to my schedule for sure than I would have if I owned and operated a business.
Do you think there's any opportunity for like mini residencies or like postgraduate education for people who want to learn more jaw surgery or TMJ in training programs? You know what I mean? Like grab the people who have good salaries and give them a little bit of extra
Mhm.
education once they're out and about. Um, is
Yeah,
that
yeah,
something
that
that people are
part-time
doing?
model where you get somebody who is wanting to
Oh,
teach a couple days a week or a day a
no, I mean
week.
just the training part of it, right? I mean, in terms of future education, if we go down to like 4 years and maybe don't have as many faculty as you might have had in the past, but people will still get trained to be good surgeons. But if they wanted to be a little extra training, are there opportunities that exist out there? Because I know Wasson, you did one in a private practice, right? Like a TMJ mini residency. Who's that
Yeah,
run?
that's not a private practice. That's an actual you go to a course a few weekends a year.
But is it like run by like Cornell or is it run by like an
I think
academic
it was
center?
actually through University of Maryland was part of it. Um, that
Are,
could have changed.
are those things that are interesting to people on your side, Mark, or not really? Or is it kind of difficult because of
Yeah.
the admin and everything?
No, I've seen an uptick in people wanting to do fellowships. We tend to have, I'd say about half of our residents in the last 15 years have done some kind of postgraduate, additional time, uh,
Yeah.
be it accredited or not. And I'm a huge advocate of fellowships. So, I'm not against all additional training. It's just that, medical school is one where the advantages are a little bit fuzzier, but I, I think fellowships are incredible for pound what they deliver. Like I said, to have that concentrated experience where you're allowed to really to get so much, in the wild, getting that much jaw surgery, as you would do in a fellowship, it would take you 10 years in the wild, 5 to 10 years to get that many, and you can get it in 1 year, super concentrated. And when you walk out of there, you really have a completely different set of skills and ability. So I'm a huge fellowship fan. I think we should have more of them. If you look at orthopedic surgery, otolaryngology, Odo has about 12 subfields, and each of them you can do fellowships in. And I do feel like our field has not um, cultivated fellowships. I've been part of lots of faculty meetings, at AMS or otherwise, where people will say, "Hey, I wanted to get a fellowship in this or that," and oftentimes the words people will say, well, trauma surgery, you can't have a fellowship in that because that's core OMS. Or jaw surgery, you can't have an accredited fellowship in that because that's core OMS.
Yeah.
But that,
Kind of
I just think
nonsense.
that's anti-intellectual to think that a resident is like knows everything there is to know about jaw surgery because they spent a year doing it off and on is just completely silly.
Yeah.
I
you
agree
know
completely.
but I think there are pressures within our field that I don't know, this is a bit conspiratorial, but um I'm not sure why we don't want, or why we don't aggressively try to cultivate these fellowships. I've never really understood the force that says, well, no, we know enough I mean, it's anti-intellectual. It's like saying, well, we know enough already. There's no point in knowing more because, we're good enough.
I mean,
But
I don't know.
fellowships are how we grow, right? I mean, every specialty was once just a kind of a fellowship of general surgery, and then each fellowship develops specialties and they have fellowships, and then those things bud out. Like you said, Wasson, I mean, we're all further and further down a branch of knowledge into leafs and sub branches, and that's where you stay because there's way too much to know. And fellowships are our future branches, and we should be building them all the time, but we don't. I mean, there's only really, I don't think we have any more new. We're not accrediting, like there are no accredited jaw fellowships by CODA.
Yeah, I still hope
Um,
that'll change. I mean, when I probably told you the story already, but when I was interviewing at spots, there was a visiting faculty person through Oregon at the time, um, who asked all the chiefs what they were doing, and I mentioned I'm doing a fellowship in jaw surgery, and I got the feedback in real time what you're describing, which is, don't you know how
yeah,
to do this already?
right.
You already learned this. What else are you going to get out of a fellowship? And it seemed like strange feedback just because I was used to interacting with fellows, cancer fellows, and I really wanted to practice in the world of jaw surgery. And so I felt like I needed, like finance and just kind of like all the stuff, like how to make it happen,
Yeah,
and focus your education on that for a period of time because that's what I was planning on focusing my life on. And I mean, I felt like
yeah.
it was super helpful. So
It's the same guy who in high school said, "What do you want to go to college for? I've got a great job lined up." And the same guy in college who said, "Dental school? That sounds like punishment. Are you not done yet?" And you're saying dental school classmate who said, "Oral surgery, why do you want to do that? My dad does all his own oral surgery."
yeah, so
And everybody has an interest in you not doing it, but and I've said this a million times, but you don't do a fellowship because you're deficient in something. You do it because you love something and you
yep,
want more of it. And fellowship directors don't look at candidates and say, "Oh, wow, here's somebody who really doesn't know much. Let me, bring them into my practice and have them treat my private patients. Fellowships are competitive. They're looking for people who already have knowledge and skills. And so there's a
That's
real misconception that fellowships are like this remedial residency. And again, that's anti-intellectual. It's the view that there's nothing to learn after a 30-month OMS experience, and that's just completely silly.
Yeah.
I would throw out there, and I really would enjoy hearing your perspective on this because I think all your perspectives on this is exceedingly refreshing. But I mean, I think again, a thing I noticed in my career, and I know Sam and you down there, I mean, cancer became such a big part of our specialty. And sometimes when you add these things to your training program, they do dilute the or minimize the time you have to learn other things. So I think the presumption or the notion that every trainee of every training program comes out an expert in all the core facets of oral and maxillofacial surgery is a little delusional.
Yeah.
I often make the joke, and it's probably, but it's true, and it's probably true for you too, Sam. Like I did more trachs and neck dissections than I did implants in my training.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I did way more fibulas than I did open TMJ surgery.
TMJ surgery. Yeah, exactly.
Like to presume that like and I don't think anyone would say either of our training programs are bottom tier. Like there's only so much time, you only have so much bandwidth,
Yeah.
and then talking along these same trends and trajectories of, well, if you're in a 6-year program, you actually spend less time on service.
Right.
And you have work restriction hours that maybe you didn't in the past. Like, I mean, all of these things tend to point towards that statement being ludicrous. And maybe again, so that was kind of my question as before I got on my soapbox there was like, do you see that in resident training with all of these new components? Do you feel like we have diluted the experience in some of the core concepts of OMFS to grasp at some of these peripheral things? Like, because when I was applying, everyone always says, hey, you want a broad scope training program so you get exposure to enough stuff to be well-rounded, well-educated, and then also know what you want to do. But then I
Mhm.
got into training and I was like, I didn't get any real experience in X or Y to know if I wanted to do it.
Not enough to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, do you have opinions, takes, perspectives on that you'd like to share?
Yeah, that's why every month of OMS is so valuable. And, because our training programs are short. We spend 30 months minimum doing OMS. I'd say on average, most programs have about 34 months maybe of OMS, 35 on average, but otolaryngologists do 58 to 60 months of otolaryngology rotations. And orthopedic surgeons do 60 months of orthopedic surgery rotations. So when we're done, an orthopedic surgeon might be half done-ish with their orthopedic surgery experiences. So we don't have much, and we're trying to cram them all in there. And so, yeah, when we add a high demand, a new aspect to our training programs, you have to take something else off the plate, and that's a kind of a constant struggle. And there's a camp of people who say, well, they don't need to know this so-called simple surgery, dental alveolar surgery, because quote unquote, and I think, Sam and I trained with somebody who was a leader in our department and field who strongly felt this way, that that all can be learned in practice. You'll figure out how to do dental alveolar reconstruction and surgery and be an expert in that after you finish training. And I think that can be used against us. Our competitors in other fields can say, yes, those oral surgeons, they're such wonderful people, and gosh, they have immense training and they just love to do the big stuff. But you should, we really focus on your oral health, and so everything can be used against you.
Please don't
so to speak.
mention that group by name. Don't mention that group by name on this podcast. Don't speak that evil here on Down Fracture.
Yeah,
But,
exactly. It can.
Yeah,
be
I think
used,
that's a good point. You were going to say something, Sam?
It's hard to be the masters of everything, and you kind of have to pick and choose.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, you're also at the whim of your faculty too. Like, I mean, that's not minimized either. Like, they're not the jack of all trades, and many of them don't have interest in certain things. And
Yeah.
Sometimes you're so deep in trauma, infections, and pathology, you don't have time to do TMJ or jaw surgery. And it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy is as we teach less of this stuff and we have less masters of these things, how are they then going to go and be masterful enough to teach the next generation? It's
And the only thing our documents, our accreditation standards really demand is a certain anesthesia experience. That's the only thing that's truly spelled out in the duration of number of months and a specific number of clinical experiences. Everything else is kind of agglomerated together as, major surgery.
Sam,
And
you were going to
And
say something?
I was going to thank you for fighting the good fight on the resident education. I mean, I feel like the different battles that you face on the medical side and the dental side and the political sides and just kind of like the personal side, it's kind of like, I don't know. I want to say I really appreciate all the different efforts you've had to teach all the residents that you've taught. I mean, I think that people who might be listening to this to get down the path of resident education and doing what you do is a wonderful field. I mean, it's noble. I think you're
it
helping a
is.
ton of different people, and so it's really a great career path that I just want to say I'm happy that you chose. So
Yeah, and I'm glad you because I did kind of shine um I did throw some shade. It's easy to throw shade. It's hard to shed light. And I love it. Like I remember my old chairman, he would always tell me, Mark, being a program director is the best job in academic surgery. And it's nice to be a program director. It's nice to move on afterwards. I kind of started doing it again, a bit surprisingly. I wasn't really planning to do it again, but now that I do it again, I really love it. And I like academics really suits me. I like it. People often say thank you, but I really feel like my job is super simple and fun and easy. And I love working with the residents, and I'm just suited to be a teacher. And I used to always think, I was building this legacy and I would someday, you know, have my picture somewhere in some hallway. I think and when we're young, we're always thinking about that, what we're building towards. But I found that that's not likely. I think we're, and this is no knock against anything. It's just a philosophical view. I mean, we are prominent and maybe known while we're on the stage, but as soon as you exit the stage, you're forgotten, and that's okay. We're here to help folks. I love teaching people how to do surgery, and then I feel like I have a bit of a magnifying effect, so I can influence somebody's outlook on life, and so maybe some of the things I do, I can magnify my effect in ways I couldn't otherwise. So
Yeah, that's great.
it's amazing. Sometimes I'll talk about people who we all know the names of and who have retired, and the residents don't know who they are. And these were, so-called household names, and that's no knock against the residents. It's just, it's okay that things are ephemeral. None of us is here for forever, and that's all right. It's just
Yeah.
it's
I
just fun
mean,
to work with folks and solve problems.
I will say it is a little weird that your picture is up in Sam's
Yes.
hallway
All my handwritten notes
I,
with a bunch
posted
of
on the
hearts and
wall.
stars around it. It's
I didn't get much chance to influence Sam because he was in his last year. I remember I was incredibly more like dependent on him because it was my first year there and I didn't know where anything was. And Sam seemed incredibly competent and knowledgeable. And so I was just like, okay, I better listen to this guy.
no, I mean, because of the things that you would say and the way you go about them is simple and it's like common sense way. Like I think everyone got out of today's discussion. I really appreciated that stuff. I mean, like the plating and pus. I think about that with orthodontic surgery frequently, actually. So I think there's a lot of truth in persistent infections being non-unions. So anyway,
Yeah. Yeah. I love jaw surgery and I love trauma surgery. If I could just do those two things, I would just do nothing but, just open condyles and do cleft advancements. And
you're speaking our language. That's all we like to
yeah.
talk about anyway. So yeah, no, I appreciate you
Yeah.
coming on today, Mark. I know you're a busy guy, so not just continuing your bike on a beautiful day in Portland for like a 30-40 mile ride and actually joining us. I really appreciate it. So
Yeah, still
You-
plenty of daylight left. It's been a lot of fun chatting with you guys. Really enjoyed it. Hopefully somebody
Yes.
gets something out of this. So
no, I'm
Oh,
sure
they
we
will.
will.
I mean, I got a lot out of it. I thought it was great. And like I said, I think it's just refreshing to hear a somewhat unbiased perspective instead of a one that feels it has to justify itself every which direction. So thanks
yeah,
again for coming on.
yeah.
And
I just want to say I love my program and I like our medical degree and we have a wonderful medical school and I don't want any of that to change. I just um, it's been when from my perspective, I just have seen some of these winds blowing for quite a while, and I kind of feel like I'm the crazy guy sometimes standing and saying, "Hey, the sky might be falling," and it might not be. I might just be raising a ruckus for no reason, and everything is truly okay. But I have
maybe.
a unique perspective, I guess, from
Yeah,
my
no, that's great.
angle. So
Well, yeah, thanks again for coming on. That was another Down Fracture podcast for talking jaws. Again, downfracturepodcast@gmail.com. And we do have a YouTube channel and you can watch the video on Spotify. I don't know that the video added
wow,
a lot today, other than to see
not too
our
much.
shining faces. Not a lot of pictures, not a lot of cases, but it is there for people. Otherwise, again, thanks for Dr. Mark Engelstad coming on with us today, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thanks, Mark. See you.
You bet. Love listening to this.